In the time of the Fourth Dynasty, when Egypt stood at the pinnacle of its architectural genius, and the pharaohs commanded the labor of thousands in service to eternity, there lived a young priest named Kamweset who served in the temple of Ra at Heliopolis, the city of the sun. And he was not born to nobility or wealth, but had risen through the ranks of the priesthood through his exceptional intelligence and his uncanny ability to read the movements of the heavens. For from his earliest childhood, Kamweset had been fascinated by the stars and the sun and the moon, watching their paths across the sky with an intensity that his parents found both remarkable and slightly concerning. And by the time he reached his 20th year, he had mastered the ancient astronomical texts and could predict eclipses and calculate the precise moment of the solstices with accuracy that amazed even the high priests. And it was this gift that would draw him into one of the greatest mysteries of his age, a mystery that would consume his life and reveal secrets about the Pyramids of Giza that would echo through the millennia. Secrets about light and shadow and the precise mathematical relationship between the monuments and the sun itself. And our story begins on a day when the heat of summer lay heavy across the land. When the Nile ran low in its banks and the farmers waited anxiously for the inundation that would come with the new year, and Kamweset stood atop one of the lesser temples in Heliopolis, his eyes fixed on the western horizon where the great Pyramids of Giza rose like mountains against the sky. Those three massive structures that had been built by Khufu and Khafre and Menkaure, pharaohs who had transformed millions of limestone blocks into monuments that seemed to touch the very heavens. And as Kamweset watched, he noticed something that he had never quite registered before: the way the afternoon sun struck the northern face of the Great Pyramid, creating a pattern of light and shadow that seemed almost deliberate, almost intentional, as if the builders had designed the structure not merely as a tomb, but as some kind of cosmic instrument. And this observation planted a seed in his mind that would grow into an obsession, for Kamweset began to wonder whether the pyramid's alignment was more precise than anyone had realized. Whether these monuments contained astronomical secrets that had been lost or forgotten in the generations since their construction. And he sought permission from his superiors to travel to Giza and study the pyramids directly, arguing that understanding the ancient wisdom encoded in these structures was essential to maintaining the proper religious observances. And after much deliberation, the high priest granted his request, though with a warning that many had become lost in contemplating the mysteries of the pyramids, that these monuments had a way of consuming those who studied them too deeply, drawing them into riddles that had no answers. But Kamweset was undeterred, and he made the journey to Giza with his instruments and his scrolls. Arriving at the plateau as the sun rose over the eastern desert, and the sight that greeted him was more magnificent than anything he had imagined, for while he had seen the pyramids from a distance many times, standing at their base was an entirely different experience. The Great Pyramid rose before him like a stairway to heaven itself, its sides originally covered in polished white limestone that reflected the sun's light with such intensity that it could be seen for miles in every direction. And Kamweset felt a profound sense of awe and insignificance, understanding that he stood before something that transcended ordinary human achievement, something that represented the absolute pinnacle of mathematical and architectural knowledge. And he established himself in a small dwelling near the Valley Temple, befriending the priests who maintained the mortuary cults of the long-dead pharaohs, and he began his observations in earnest, rising before dawn each day to track the first rays of sunlight as they touched the pyramids, staying late into the night to observe how the moonlight played across their faces, and slowly, painstakingly, he began to map the relationship between these structures and the celestial bodies, measuring angles with his Merkhet and Bay, recording the positions of stars and planets, calculating and recalculating until his scrolls were covered with numbers and diagrams. And as the months passed and the seasons changed, Kamweset began to notice patterns that filled him with growing excitement. For it became clear that the pyramids were not randomly oriented, but were aligned with extraordinary precision to the cardinal directions, north and south and east and west, with an accuracy that seemed impossible given the tools available to the ancient builders. And more than this, he discovered that the pyramid's relationship to the sun varied throughout the year in ways that suggested deliberate design. that certain faces would catch the light at certain times in patterns that were too regular to be coincidental, and it was during the approach to the summer solstice, that longest day of the year, when Ra's power reached its zenith, that Kamweset made his most startling discovery, for he noticed that as the sun rose on the days leading up to the solstice, a strange phenomenon began to occur on the Great Pyramid's northern face. The pyramid, which appeared to have 4 smooth sides, actually possessed a subtle concavity, a slight indentation on each face that was invisible from a distance, but became apparent when the light struck at certain angles, and during the specific conditions of the solstice period. When the sun rose at its most northerly point, and the angle of sunlight was precisely calibrated, this concavity caused the pyramid to appear to have 8 sides instead of 4, with the eastern half of the northern face catching the light while the western half remained in shadow, creating a division line that ran from apex to base. And this effect lasted only for a brief period around dawn, and was visible only during certain times of the year, primarily during the spring and autumn equinoxes, and to a lesser extent during the summer solstice. And Kamweset watched this phenomenon with trembling hands and a raw, acing heart, for he understood that he was witnessing something that had been intentionally built into the structure, a feature that required such precise mathematical calculation and such perfect execution that it seemed to verify all his theories about the pyramids being far more than simple tombs. They were astronomical instruments, calendars built in stone, markers that tracked the movement of the sun with breathtaking accuracy, and he began to investigate whether similar phenomena occurred with the other pyramids on the plateau. Whether Khafre's pyramid and Menkare's pyramid also possessed secrets related to solar alignments, and indeed he found that each pyramid had its own relationship with the sun, that the causeway leading to each pyramid was oriented in ways that connected to solar events, that the temples associated with each structure were positioned to catch the light at significant moments. And Kamweset documented everything meticulously, creating detailed drawings and extensive calculations, building wooden models to test his theories about how the light would behave at different times of year. And his reputation began to grow among the priests and scholars who visited Giza. People spoke of the young astronomer priest who had unlocked secrets of the ancient builders, who could predict with uncanny accuracy when certain light phenomena would occur, and visitors began to time their pilgrimages to Giza to coincide with the moments Kamweset had identified, wanting to witness these solar events for themselves. And as the summer solstice approached in his Siko, end year at Giza, Kamweset prepared for what he believed would be the most significant observation yet, for his calculations suggested that something extraordinary would occur at the precise moment of the solstice. Something involving not just the Great Pyramid, but all 3 major pyramids working in concert, some kind of alignment or light effect that had perhaps not been witnessed in generations. And he invited several prominent priests and nobles to join him, wanting witnesses to whatever might occur, wanting to share this moment of discovery with others who could appreciate its significance. And as the days counted down to the solstice, Kamweset barely slept, checking and rechecking his calculations, positioning markers on the plateau where he believed observers should stand to best witness the phenomena. And finally the day arrived, the longest day of the year, when Ra would reach his greatest power, and the sun would trace its highest arc across the sky. And Kamweset rose in the darkness before dawn, accompanied by a dozen priests and nobles who had accepted his invitation. And they made their way to a specific location on the plateau that Kamweset had identified as the optimal viewing position. And as the eastern sky began to lighten, as the stars faded and the deep blue of night gave way to the purple and pink of approaching sunrise, a hush fell over the assembled observers, and Kamweset felt his heart pounding in his chest, wondering if his calculations were correct, wondering if the phenomenon he had predicted would actually occur. And then the first edge of the sun appeared above the horizon, and its rays shot across the desert like spears of molten gold, and they struck the pyramids in sequence, first touching the apex of the Great Pyramid, then spreading down its faces. And as the light descended, Kamweset saw it, the 8-sided effect manifesting with crystal clarity on the northern face, the eastern half brilliant with light while the western half remained in shadow, creating that impossible division line that seemed to split the structure in two. And simultaneously, the light was striking Khafre's pyramid at an angle that made its peak appear to glow like a beacon, and the smaller pyramid of Menkaure caught the light in a way that emphasized its different proportions. And for a few perfect moments, all three pyramids were aligned in their relationship to the rising sun, forming a pattern in light and shadow that clearly was no accident. That represented sophisticated astronomical knowledge encoded in stone, and the observers gasped and whispered prayers, some of them weeping at the beauty and the significance of what they were witnessing. And Kamweset felt a profound sense of vindication and wonder, for his theories had been proven correct. The ancient builders had indeed embedded astronomical alignments into these structures, had created monuments that interacted with the sun in precise and predictable ways. And as the sun continued its rise and the phenomenon faded, as the light spread across all the surfaces of the pyramids and the special moment passed, Kamweset knew that his life's work had found its purpose. That he would spend his remaining years documenting and understanding these solar alignments, preserving this knowledge for future generations who might otherwise lose this connection to the wisdom of the ancestors. And word of what had been witnessed spread quickly through Egypt. And soon Kamweset found himself summoned to the royal court, for the reigning pharaoh, a descendant of the great pyramid builders, wanted to hear directly about these discoveries, wanted to understand what secrets the monuments of his ancestors contained. And Kamweset was honored but also anxious, for he knew that knowledge could be dangerous. That revealing too much about the astronomical sophistication of the pyramids might challenge existing religious doctrines or political narratives. And when he stood before the pharaoh in the great audience hall at Memphis, surrounded by courtiers and priests and nobles, he chose his words carefully, explaining that the pyramids were monuments to the divine order of Ma'at, that they reflected the harmony between heaven and earth, that they demonstrated how the pharaohs who built them were truly the sons of Ra, capable of commanding both human labor and cosmic forces. And the pharaoh listened intently, asking probing questions that revealed a sharp intelligence, wanting to know whether these alignments had practical applications, whether they could be used to improve the accuracy of the calendar or to predict astronomical events. And Kamweset confirmed that yes, the pyramids could function as a kind of permanent observatory, that by tracking the shadows they cast, and the way sunlight struck their faces at different times, one could mark the solstices and equinoxes with great precision, could measure the year more accurately than by simply watching the Nile's inundation. And the pharaoh was pleased by this, for anything that enhanced Egypt's astronomical knowledge also enhanced its power. And he commanded that Kamweset be given resources and assistance, that he establish a formal program of observation at Giza, training other priests in these techniques, ensuring that the knowledge would not be lost. And so Kamweset returned to Giza with an official mandate and greater authority, and he selected several promising young priests to train as astronomical observers, teaching them not only how to use the instruments but how to think about the relationship between architecture and astronomy, how to see the pyramids not just as tombs but as instruments of measurement, as calendars and observatories built on a scale that dwarfed any other astronomical facility in the world. And his students proved to be quick learners, and together they began to compile a comprehensive record of all the solar phenomena associated with the pyramids, documenting not just the obvious effects visible during the solstices, but also subtler phenomena that occurred throughout the year, the way certain corners would cast shadows that pointed to specific stars at their rising, the way the causeways aligned with the setting sun on certain days, the way the spacing between the three main pyramids seemed to correlate with astronomical ratios. And as the iron knowledge deepened, they began to develop theories about why the ancient builders had encoded this information, what purpose it served beyond mere decoration or religious symbolism. And Kamweset came to believe that the pyramids represented a kind of message or legacy, that the builders wanted to ensure that certain astronomical knowledge would survive even if the civilization that created them fell, that future generations would be able to learn from these stone monuments long after scrolls had crumbled and oral traditions had been forgotten. And this idea filled him with a sense of profound responsibility. For if he was correct, then he was not just observing but decoding, acting as a bridge between the ancient wisdom and the present age. And he redoubled his efforts to document everything, creating detailed scrolls that explained each phenomenon, drawing precise diagrams, writing instructions for how future observers should position themselves and what they should look for. And years passed in this manner, with Kamweset dividing his time between Giza and Heliopolis, between observation and teaching, and he became one of the most respected astronomers in Egypt. Consulted by pharaohs and high priests, honored in temples throughout the land. But he never lost his fundamental humility before the mysteries of the pyramids, never claimed to have understood everything, always maintaining that there were deeper layers still to be discovered, more secrets waiting to be revealed to those patient and observant enough to find them. And as he grew older, as his hair turned gray, and his eyes began to weaken, he focused increasingly on training his successors, on ensuring that the work would continue after he was gone, and he selected one particularly brilliant student, a young woman named Neferhetipes, who had shown exceptional aptitude for astronomical observation. And to her he passed on not just his techniques and his knowledge, but his passion and his sense of wonder. And Neferhetipes became his assistant and his scribe, recording his observations and his theories, and together they witnessed many more solstices and equinoxes, many more solar alignments that took their breath away. And on one particularly memorable summer solstice, when Kamweset was in his 60th year, they observed a phenomenon that he had never seen before, for the atmospheric conditions were perfect, with a slight haze in the air that diffracted the light in unusual ways. And as the sun rose, they saw the Great Pyramid appear to glow from within, as if it were not made of stone, but of crystallized light itself. And the effect lasted only moments, but it was so striking that both observers were left speechless, and Kamweset whispered that this was what the ancient builders had intended, this transformation of stone into light. This demonstration that matter and energy were ultimately expressions of the same divine force, that the pyramid was simultaneously a physical object and a manifestation of Ra's power. And Neferhetipes recorded his words carefully, understanding that she was witnessing not just an astronomical phenomenon, but a kind of spiritual revelation. And as years continued to pass and Kamweset's health began to decline, he spent more time reflecting on what he had learned, on the implications of these solar alignments for understanding Egyptian civilization and its relationship to the cosmos. And he came to see the pyramids as representing a worldview in which heaven and earth were not separate realms but interpenetrating dimensions, where the movements of celestial bodies directly influenced terrestrial affairs, where pharaohs were literally the children of the sun god, embodying in their persons the connection between human and divine, and the pyramids, with their precise astronomical alignments, were physical proof of this cosmology. Demonstrations built in millions of tons of stone that the ancient Egyptians possessed both the spiritual vision and the technical capability to manifest their understanding of cosmic order. And Kamweset dictated a final treatise on these matters, a comprehensive work that synthesized all his observations and theories, that provided detailed instructions for observing the solar phenomena, that speculated about what other secrets might still be hidden in the pyramid's proportions and alignments. And when he finally felt his death approaching, when he knew that his time in the world of the living was coming to an end, he asked to be taken one last time to Giza, to stand before the Great Pyramid at dawn. And Neferhetipes and his other students carried him on a litter to the plateau, and they positioned him so that he could see the monuments clearly. And as the sun rose on what would be his last day, he watched the light strike the pyramids one final time, watched the shadows shift and the colors change, and he smiled, for he felt that he understood, that he had grasped something essential about the relationship between human aspiration and cosmic reality, that he had served his purpose as a keeper and transmitter of ancient wisdom. And he closed his eyes as the sun climbed higher, as the heat began to build, and his ka departed peacefully, ascending to the field of reeds, where he would be reunited with all those who had gone before. And his students mourned him, but also celebrated his life, for he had given them a gift beyond price. He had taught them to see the pyramids with new eyes, to understand that these monuments were not just tombs but calendars and observatories and messages in stone. And Neferhetipes took up his work, becoming the chief astronomical observer at Giza, continuing the observations through the changing seasons, training new students, preserving and extending Kamweset's legacy. And the tradition he established continued for generations, with priests and scholars studying the solar alignments, witnessing the light phenomena during the solstices and equinoxes, marveling at the precision and sophistication of the ancient builders, But as centuries passed and Egypt's fortunes waxed and waned, as dynasties rose and fell and foreign powers invaded and were repelled or absorbed, the knowledge that Kamweset had so carefully preserved began to fragment and fade, for the priesthood that maintained his tradition was disrupted by political upheavals and religious reforms, particularly during the Amarna period when Akhenaten attempted to replace the traditional pantheon with worship of the Aten alone, and many ancient texts were destroyed or lost during this turbulent time. And though the old religion was eventually restored, some knowledge was never recovered. And the precise astronomical observations that had been maintained at Giza for centuries began to lapse, becoming less rigorous, less systematic, until eventually they were reduced to mere ritual observations without deep understanding of the underlying principles, and the pyramids themselves began to suffer from the depredations of time and human activity. For the beautiful white limestone casing stones that had once covered their surfaces were gradually stripped away, taken to build mosques and palaces in Cairo, and without these precisely shaped outer layers, some of the more subtle light effects that the ancient builders had designed became impossible to observe. And the eight-sided phenomenon that had so captivated Kamweset became harder to detect, visible only under very specific atmospheric conditions, and the collective memory of what these monuments had been designed to do, of their function as astronomical instruments, faded into legend and myth. And by the time the Greeks and Romans came to Egypt, bringing their own perspectives and assumptions, the pyramids were already ancient beyond reckoning, already mysterious, already the subject of wild speculation and fantastic theories. And though some Greek scholars like Herodotus attempted to learn out the pyramids from Egyptian priests, much of what they were told was already corrupted by time, mixed with genuine history and pure invention in ways that made it difficult to separate fact from fiction. And the Romans treated the pyramids primarily as tourist attractions, marveling at their size but showing little interest in understanding their astronomical function. And so the knowledge that Kamweset had worked so hard to preserve was largely lost, surviving only in fragmentary references in obscure texts, in hieroglyphic inscriptions that few could read, in oral traditions that became increasingly garbled with each retelling. And the centuries continued their relentless march, and Egypt became a Christian land, and the old gods were declared demons or dismissed as superstitions, and the temples were abandoned or converted to churches. And the priestly traditions that had maintained astronomical observations for millennia came to an end. And then Islam swept across North Africa, bringing yet another transformation, another reinterpretation of Egypt's ancient heritage. And the pyramids endured through all of this, weathered and worn but still standing, still mysterious, still drawing the gaze of anyone who saw them. And scholars of the Islamic Golden Age studied them with renewed interest, attempting to understand their purpose and construction. And some of them recognized that the pyramids were aligned with remarkable precision to the cardinal directions, and they speculated about astronomical purposes. But they lacked access to the detailed knowledge that Kamweset and his successors had compiled, and so their theories remained incomplete. And more centuries passed, and European scholars began to take interest in Egypt's antiquities. And the study of Egyptology was born, and archaeologists and astronomers came to Giza with modern instruments, with theodolites and telescopes and cameras, attempting to measure and document everything about these enigmatic structures. And slowly, painstakingly, some of what had been lost began to be rediscovered. For when careful measurements were made of the pyramids' orientations, researchers were astonished to find that they were aligned to true north with an accuracy of less than 1/20th of a degree, a precision that seemed impossible for structures built with ancient technology. And this discovery led to intense speculation about how the ancient Egyptians had achieved such accuracy, what methods they had used, what astronomical knowledge they must have possessed, and various theories were proposed, some suggesting that the builders had used the stars to determine true north, perhaps by tracking the circular path of stars around the celestial pole, or by bisecting the angle between the rising and setting positions of a particular star. And these theories were plausible, demonstrating that with careful observation and simple tools, remarkable precision could be achieved. And as research continued and more detailed surveys were conducted, other alignments began to be noticed. The way the pyramid sides faced the cardinal directions with such exactitude, the way certain passages and chambers seemed to point towards specific stars or to align with the solstices. And one researcher in particular, a British astronomer named Richard Proctor in the late 19th century, proposed that the Great Pyramid's descending passage had been used as an observatory, that observers could have tracked stars as they crossed the narrow field of view provided by this passage, using it like a giant telescope to make precise measurements. And while some of his specific claims were later disputed, his general insight that the pyramid incorporated astronomical functions was sound. And in the 20th century, as archaeological techniques became more sophisticated, and as new technologies like aerial photography and satellite imagery became available, even more details about the pyramid's solar alignments began to emerge, and researchers discovered that ancient phenomenon that Kamweset had documented, the concavity of the Great Pyramid's faces, which created the eight-sided effect under certain lighting conditions. And this discovery caused tremendous excitement, for it demonstrated a level of architectural sophistication that far exceeded what most scholars had assumed. The concavity was extremely subtle, with each face of the pyramid indented by only about 1 meter over a length of more than 200 meters, creating a curve so gentle that it was invisible to casual observation, but which had profound effects on how light interacted with the structure. And researchers realized that creating this concavity would have required not only advanced mathematical knowledge, but also extraordinary precision in construction, with millions of stones placed with exacting accuracy to achieve the desired curve. And the fact that this feature had been built into the structure deliberately, that it served an aesthetic and possibly astronomical purpose, revealed that the pyramid's designers had been thinking not just about creating a massive tomb, but about creating a monument that would interact with light in specific and meaningful ways. And modern astronomers began to study when and how this eight-sided effect was visible, confirming that it appeared most clearly around the spring and autumn equinoxes, those moments when day and night are equal, when the sun crosses the celestial equator. And they realized that ancient observers standing in the right location at the right time would have seen this phenomenon clearly, would have understood it as a marker of these important astronomical events. And this led to broader investigations of other solar phenomena at Giza. And researchers discovered that during the summer solstice, the sun sets directly over the shoulder of the second pyramid when viewed from specific locations, creating a dramatic visual effect. And that various causeways and temples associated with the pyramids were oriented to capture sunlight during significant moments of the year. And that the entire Giza complex, when viewed as an integrated whole, represented a sophisticated astronomical observatory and calendar, a three-dimensional representation of cosmic order built in stone. And some researchers went even further, proposing that the three-pyramid C's layout corresponded to the three stars of Orion's belt, that the entire complex was a terrestrial mirror of celestial patterns, though this theory remained controversial and was disputed by many mainstream Egyptologists. But what was undeniable was that the pyramids incorporated deliberate astronomical alignments, that their builders had possessed sophisticated knowledge of the sun's movements and the stars' positions, and that at least some of this knowledge had been intentionally encoded in the monument's design. And as the 21st century dawned and new technologies continued to develop, researchers found new ways to study the pyramids, using laser scanning to create precise three-dimensional models, using computer simulations to reconstruct how the pyramids would have looked when their casing stones were intact, using astronomical software to calculate exactly how the sun and stars would have appeared in ancient times, accounting for the precession of the equinoxes and other long-term celestial changes. And these studies confirmed and extended what earlier researchers had discovered, showing that the solar alignments were even more precise and more extensive than previously realized. And some researchers began to experiment with observing the pyramids during the actual solstices and equinoxes, positioning themselves at carefully calculated locations and documenting the light phenomena with photography and video. And in the early 21st century, a photographer managed to capture the eight-sided effect during an equinox, producing images that showed clearly how the indentation on each face created a division between light and shadow. And these images circulated widely, bringing renewed attention to the astronomical sophistication of the ancient builders. And they inspired a new generation of researchers to investigate these phenomena more systematically and gradually, piece by piece. The knowledge that Kamweset had compiled 3,000 years earlier was being reconstructed, not through the recovery of his lost scrolls, which had long since crumbled to dust, but through the patient work of observation and measurement, through the application of modern astronomical knowledge to understanding ancient intentions. And some researchers began to wonder whether there might be other solar phenomena that still hadn't been discovered. Other alignments or light effects that occurred under specific conditions that hadn't yet been observed or that required atmospheric conditions that rarely occurred. And this led to ongoing monitoring of the pyramids, with cameras set up to capture time-lapse images throughout the year, documenting how the light changed with the seasons, and indeed some new phenomena were discovered. Subtle effects involving shadows cast by one pyramid onto another, or the way certain corners would catch the first or last light of the day at specific times of year. And each new discovery added to the growing understanding that the Giza complex was far more than a necropolis. It was a sacred landscape designed to embody and demonstrate astronomical knowledge, a place where heaven and earth were meant to interpenetrate, where the movements of celestial bodies could be tracked and celebrated. And this realization led to broader questions about why the ancient Egyptians had invested so much effort in creating these astronomical alignments, what religious or practical purposes they served, and scholars began to develop more nuanced interpretations, moving beyond simple explanations of they were tombs or they were monuments to pharaonic power, to understand them as multifunctional structures that served simultaneously as tombs, temples, observatories, calendars, and symbolic representations of cosmic order. And in this interpretation, the solar alignments were not just decorative features, but essential aspects of the pyramid's purpose. For the ancient Egyptians believed that the pharaoh was the living embodiment of Horus and would become one with Osiris at death, and Osiris was associated with Orion, while Ra was the sun god. And so the pyramid's astronomical alignments were a way of connecting the deceased pharaoh with these divine forces, of ensuring that his Ka could ascend to the stars or sail with Ra in the solar barquet. And the fact that the pyramids interacted with sunlight in specific ways on the solstices and equinoxes meant that these monuments were literally participating in the cosmic cycles, were demonstrating through their physical forms the eternal rhythms that governed all existence. And this understanding brought researchers full circle back to something like the perspective that Kamweset had held, seeing the pyramids not just as impressive feats of engineering, but as red instruments that manifested a worldview. And in recent years, some scholars and spiritual seekers have attempted to revive the practice of observing the solar phenomena at Giza during the solstices and equinoxes, gathering at the pyramids to witness these ancient alignments, to experience for themselves the moments when the monuments interact most dramatically with the sun. And while modern Cairo has grown to surround the pyramids, while pollution and urban light make astronomical observation more difficult than it was in ancient times, the fundamental phenomena can still be witnessed. The sun still rises at the same angles, still creates patterns of light and shadow on these ancient stones, still marks the turning of the seasons with precise regularity. And those who witness these events often report a profound sense of connection to the ancient past, a feeling that they are participating in something timeless, that they are seeing what countless generations before them have seen. And in these moments, the millennia collapse, and it becomes possible to imagine standing where Kamweset stood, seeing what he saw, feeling what he felt, that mixture of awe and understanding, that recognition that these monuments represent human beings reaching toward something greater than themselves, attempting to capture in stone the patterns of the cosmos, to create something that would endure long after they themselves had returned to dust. And the pyramids have indeed endured, surviving 4,500 years of weather and war, of earthquakes and human depredation, and they continue to reveal their secrets slowly, grudgingly, to those patient enough to study them. And the solar alignments that Kamweset documented are perhaps the most beautiful of these secrets. For they demonstrate that the ancient builders were not just moving massive stones, but were choreographing a dance between earth and heaven, creating monuments that would perform annually, that would catch the light at appointed times and transform themselves, however briefly, from mere matter into something that seemed alive, seemed almost divine. And as our story draws toward its conclusion, we might reflect on what these solar alignments tell us about the civilization that created them, about a culture that possessed such sophisticated astronomical knowledge, such advanced mathematical capabilities, Such extraordinary organizational skills and such profound commitment to embodying cosmic principles in physical form, and we might consider how this knowledge was transmitted across generations, how it was preserved in some forms and lost in others, how the work of careful observers like Kamweset helped to maintain these traditions until historical disruptions caused them to fragment, and how modern researchers, using different tools and working from different assumptions, have managed to recover much of this ancient wisdom, to read once again the astronomical meanings encoded in these stone monuments. And we might marvel at the persistence of the pyramids themselves, at their ability to continue functioning as solar calendars and observatories even after their original purpose was forgotten, even after the civilization that built them had vanished, for the sun continues to rise and set regardless of whether anyone is watching. Continues to strike these ancient stones at precise angles determined by the geometry of the solar system and the careful calculations of long-dead architects. And in this way, the pyramids have become a kind of eternal message, a communication that transcends language and culture, that speaks through pure mathematics and astronomy, through the universal language of light and shadow. And anyone who takes the time to observe, who positions themselves correctly and watches patiently during the solstices or equinoxes, can receive this message, can witness these monuments performing as they were designed to perform, can connect across the vast gulf of time to the minds that conceived these structures and the hands that built them. And perhaps this is the ultimate purpose of the solar alignments at Giza, not just to mark time or to honor the sun god or to demonstrate royal power, but to create a bridge between past and future, to ensure that knowledge would be preserved in a form that could survive the collapse of civilizations and the death of languages. And in this, the ancient builders succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. For we stand here now, 4,000 years later, still watching the sun strike these monuments, still discovering new details about their astronomical sophistication, still learning from the wisdom they contain. And the story that began with Kamweset's observations continues in the work of modern researchers, continues in the experience of every visitor who watches the sunrise at Giza, continues in the eternal dance between these stone mountains and the celestial bodies they were designed to track. And it will continue long after we ourselves are gone. For as long as the pyramids stand and the sun continues its apparent journey across the sky, these alignments will persist. These light phenomena will recur. These ancient stones will continue their slow conversation with the cosmos, and future generations, perhaps using technologies we cannot yet imagine, will discover even deeper layers of meaning in these structures. We'll find new ways to interpret the astronomical knowledge encoded in their design, and they will stand in wonder, as we do, as Kamweset did, before these monuments that represent the absolute pinnacle of human aspiration and achievement. These structures that are simultaneously tombs and temples and observatories and calendars and works of art and mathematical proofs, these pyramids that have become symbols of Egypt itself, of human civilization's capacity to create something that transcends the individual, that embodies collective knowledge and effort, that speaks to the eternal even while being built from temporal materials. And as the sun sets behind the pyramids on another day, as the shadows lengthen and the light fades and the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, we can imagine Kamweset's spirit watching over the monuments he loved, satisfied that his work was not in vain, that the knowledge he preserved has been recovered and extended, that generations continue to marvel at the solar alignments he first documented, that the conversation between humanity and cosmos that these monuments represent continues unbroken, and in this continuity, in this transmission of wonder and knowledge across the vast expanse of time, we find perhaps the deepest meaning of the pyramids and their solar alignments, for they remind us that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that we are connected to those who came before and those who will come after, that the pursuit of knowledge and the creation of beauty are endeavors that transcend individual lives and even individual civilizations, becoming part of the permanent heritage of humanity itself. And so the solar alignments at Giza stand as testament not just to ancient Egyptian astronomical knowledge, but to the enduring human desire to understand our place in the cosmos, to mark time and celebrate the celestial cycles that govern our existence, to create monuments that will outlast us and carry our knowledge forward into an unknown future. And in this, The pyramids have succeeded magnificently, continuing to teach and inspire after more than 4 millennia, continuing to reveal their secrets to those patient and observant enough to see, continuing to perform their annual dance with the sun, marking the solstices and equinoxes, catching the light in ways that transform stone into something that seems almost alive. And as long as the sun rises and sets, as long as the earth continues its eternal rotation and revolution, as long as curious minds seek to understand the achievements of the past, these solar alignments will remain one of the most beautiful and sophisticated examples of ancient astronomical knowledge. A gift from the distant past that continues to illuminate our understanding of what human beings can achieve when they combine scientific knowledge with artistic vision. When they harness collective effort toward a transcendent goal. When they build not just for themselves but for eternity. And this is the legacy of the solar alignments at Giza. This is the story that Kamweset helped to preserve and that we continue to tell. This eternal conversation between earth and heaven, between human aspiration and cosmic reality. Embodied in these magnificent monuments that continue to stand, weathered but unbowed, mysterious but slowly yielding their secrets, ancient but somehow timeless, waiting patiently for each new generation to discover what they have to teach, to witness the light phenomena that recur with astronomical precision, to stand in awe before human achievement that reached toward the divine and created something that would endure through the ages. Something that speaks to us still across the vast gulf of time, telling us that we too can reach beyond ourselves, that we too can create beauty and meaning that will outlast our brief lives, that we too can participate in the eternal rhythms of the cosmos. And this is the final wisdom of the solar alignments at Giza, the ultimate message encoded in stone and light, that we are connected to the universe in ways both practical and mystical, that observing and understanding these connections enriches our existence, and that the monuments we create in service to this understanding can transcend time itself, becoming gifts to countless future generations who will stand where we stand, who will watch the sun as we watch it, who will marvel at what human beings once achieved and can achieve again.